All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today we're jumping right into a huge legal drama that is literally shaking up the very foundations of how we all buy and sell homes. We're talking about a billion-dollar fight that could change real estate commissions forever.
Let's start right here. $34 million. I mean, just look at that number. That's how much one major real estate company, eXp, just agreed to pay to settle a massive lawsuit. But, as huge as that number sounds, it's really just a drop in the bucket.
Yeah, a drop in the bucket, because that $34 million is just one tiny piece of a massive settlement fund that is now worth over $1 billion. And this money isn't from just one case. It's from a whole bunch of lawsuits, all targeting the same thing, the old school rules about how real estate agents get paid. So you see, this isn't just another lawsuit. It's more like a full-blown rebellion.
So, what's the latest? Well, it all revolves around a case called Hooper. A judge just gave the final stamp of approval to a huge settlement. And this one? It goes right to the heart of how buyers' agents get their commission. For the companies that were sued, this is a huge deal. It finally closes a really nasty, contentious chapter.
Okay, so who is involved? It was actually 4 different companies that were part of this big settlement. Now, eXp's $34 million payout is obviously the one grabbing all the headlines, but Weichert also coughed up a pretty significant $8.5 million. And then you had 2 other firms settling for smaller amounts, all just to make this lawsuit go away.
But here's the thing. This deal did not happen overnight. We're talking about a grueling 18-month process, from the very first handshake agreement to the final signature from the judge. And why did it take so long? Well, because the whole thing almost completely fell apart right at the finish line.
Yeah, that journey to approval was anything but smooth. Just when they thought it was a done deal, some really powerful attorneys from a different but very similar lawsuit over in Missouri, it's called the Gibson case, they stepped in. And they tried to block this entire settlement. We're talking about an 11th hour play to derail the whole thing.
So they showed up with 2 main challenges. First, they accused these companies of cooking up something called a reverse auction just to get a cheaper deal. And second, a whole other group popped up demanding what they called a buyer loophole. Now, either one of these objections could have been a bombshell, sending the whole multi-million-dollar settlement right back to square one.
Okay, let's dig into that first accusation, the reverse auction claim, because it's actually a pretty fascinating legal argument. Basically, the objectors were saying, hey, this isn't a fair settlement at all. They were claiming it was some kind of backroom deal designed to let these big companies off the hook, for cheap.
So what exactly is a reverse auction in this context? Well, the core of the argument was this. The objectors from that Gibson case claimed that the defendants, the real estate companies, were offered a settlement by their plaintiffs first, but they rejected it. Then they supposedly went shopping around and found a different group of plaintiffs, the ones in this Hooper case, who were willing to accept a smaller amount of money. So they were essentially being accused of bargain hunting for a cheaper lawsuit.
All right, so that was accusation number 1. Now, the second big hurdle came from a totally different angle. This wasn't really about the total dollar amount of the settlement. No, this was all about who could sue these companies down the road.
This other objector, he wanted something called a carve-out added to the settlement terms. And the goal was pretty simple, really. He wanted to make sure that anyone who got money from this settlement as a home seller could then turn right around and sue the very same companies all over again, but this time as a home buyer. It was a pretty clear attempt to, keep the door wide open for even more lawsuits.
So you've got the whole billion-dollar industry watching, you've got tens of millions of dollars hanging in the balance, and it all came down to one person, Judge Mark Cohen. He was the one who had to decide, were these objections legit, or was it time for this settlement to finally move forward?
And when it came to that reverse auction accusation, the judge's ruling was swift and, frankly, brutal. In a super detailed 69-page filing, he just flat out declared the argument lacked merit. And he even pointed out that there was basically zero legal precedent for making that kind of claim in a case like this. So a total shutdown.
And one of the key pieces of evidence for his decision, it actually came down to the lawyers' fees. The judge took a hard look at what the attorneys were asking to get paid. The lawyers who were objecting, the ones from the Gibson case, they wanted a full third of any settlement, 33%. But the lawyers in this case, the Hooper case, they were only asking for 20%.
And that right there was a crucial detail. The judge pointed out that the lower fee request
actually meant more money would stay with the class members. You know, the actual home sellers this lawsuit was supposed to be helping in the first place. It completely undercut the whole argument that this was somehow a bad deal for the plaintiffs.
From Judge Cohen's perspective, this difference in fees was everything. The objectors were asking for a much bigger slice of the pie for themselves, and he wrote that this made their complaints about this being a cheap settlement, well, it made them ring hollow. That was a powerful and very public smackdown.
And then he turned to that buyer loophole argument. He pretty much dismantled it with just simple logic. He said, look, first of all, anyone who wanted to sue as a buyer was totally free to just opt out of this seller settlement. No one was forcing them. And second, he said it's perfectly reasonable for these companies to want some finality here. You know, to not get sued a second time by the exact same people they were already paying millions of dollars to.
So, after a huge 18-month fight, the objections were toast and the judge's approval was final. It's a done deal. So, what's the big takeaway from this whole legal saga?
Well, for the companies involved, the answer is one word: certainty. In their official statement, eXp said this approval lets them avoid the risks and costs of protracted litigation. Basically, it closes the book on a super expensive 3-year-old legal battle and just lets them move on.
And really, that's why this whole thing matters so much. This isn't just about one company or one lawsuit. What this final approval does is lock in a huge chunk of money for that massive settlement fund, a fund that is forcing a major transformation across the entire real estate industry. It's fundamentally changing the game for how agents are going to get paid in the future. And that really brings us to the final thought here. Look, this was a huge battle, no doubt about it. But it's still just one battle in a much larger war over commissions, a war that is far from over. It really makes you wonder, what's the next shoe to drop? What's the next big headline going to be in this dramatic, ongoing shakeup of American real estate?